mines would then explode as the firefighting crews tried to contain the fires. This new terror would claim the lives of at least a third of all civilians killed in bombing raids over Germany. At the start of the Second World War, it was Britain who stood alone against Germany. Britain's course of action was determined by necessity, and an element of fate would bring about America's involvement. The situation facing the Allies was a grim one indeed. The forces of Hitler's Germany had encompassed vast areas of Europe, and by the time America entered the war, the Germans had advanced to the outskirts of Moscow. The Allies would face an uphill struggle in their attempts to gain the upper hand, and they entered the aerial war with no idea of how things would progress. The only common goal was their firm conviction to remain in the war and to fight the enemy in every way possible. They had very little idea of what the enemy possessed or what the enemy was capable of. But they would not have to wait long to discover the true potential of Hitler's forces. Forces that would exact a terrible price from Allied airmen. The bombing campaign over Germany would introduce a grim new dimension to the fighting during World War II. It was now total war, a new and savage era in which technology would lead the way as each side struggled for supremacy. The Allies had developed new weapons and devised new tactics as the war was taken to the very heart of the Reich. Now, the Germans were forced to respond in a desperate attempt to protect their vulnerable towns and cities. Like the rest of the major nations, Germany had experimented with various uses of aircraft prior to the First World War. When war finally broke out, Germany used the aeroplane principally in the role of observer and artillery spotter. They had not yet developed their own military planes, but they did have the use of huge airships that would soon be put to good use. The airships were under the control of the Military Aviation Service and would be used to bomb enemy territory. Owing to the fact that most early planes were slow, airships could outpace some enemy planes and operate at greater heights and ranges. As the war progressed, however, and the planes became faster and started to carry guns, airships became more vulnerable, and by 1917 they were virtually obsolete, as the Allies were shooting more and more of them down. It was the Germans who developed their first true bomber aircraft, and these joined the already expanding number of fighter planes. The German Army Air Service of World War I, as it became known, will always be remembered for one man, Baron von Richthofen, the infamous Red Baron. This most celebrated of air aces had 80 kills to his credit when ground fire claimed his life on April the 21st, 1918. The period after the First World War would see severe restrictions placed upon Germany by the victorious Allies. As part of the Treaty of Versailles, Germany was forbidden to have an air force, although this did not stop development of German aircraft, as manufacturers continued to make new types of planes, some of which were designed with military capabilities in mind. After Adolf Hitler came to power in 1933, the rearming of Germany began in earnest. At first this was carried out in secret, but in 1935 the rearmament was made public. 1936 would see the fledgling Luftwaffe make its entry into the Spanish Civil War, which gave the Germans an excellent testing bed for their new aircraft and new ideas on the future conduct of warfare. By the end of the Spanish Civil War in 1939, the Luftwaffe would have a core element of experienced battle-trained pilots. The Luftwaffe was expanded rapidly in the years immediately before the outbreak of the Second World War, and by September 1939, it could boast a total of almost 3,000 planes. The Luftwaffe had developed some excellent tactics by the start of the war, and these would be put to expert use during the Blitzkrieg operations in Poland and the West. The Spanish Civil War had also highlighted weaknesses, which were urgently corrected. Although the higher echelons of the Luftwaffe command structure were far from ideal, there were a large number of very capable and competent people within its ranks, who would ensure that the Luftwaffe achieved stunning victories in the early years of the war. The weaknesses in the overall German air strategy only became evident as the war progressed, but by then it was too late. Although Germany made great attempts to counter the Allied aerial threat, the die was cast, and the Allies would finally overwhelm the Luftwaffe in a battle of numbers. Although the Luftwaffe was eventually defeated, their early victories remain a symbol of what can be achieved with complete cooperation between ground and air forces. They faced ever-increasing odds, both in the West and the East, and like their Allied counterparts, the pilots remained professional and steadfast, right to the end. Field Marshal Hermann Göring was a Bavarian who became a highly successful fighter pilot after arthritis made him unfit for infantry duties during World War I. The holder of the Pour le Mérite, Germany's highest imperial battle decoration, Göring was the last commander of 1st Fighter Wing, the famous Richthofen Squadron. After the war, Göring became a leading light in the new Nazi party, forming a close friendship with Adolf Hitler. Shot and wounded during the abortive beer hall putsch in Munich in November 1923, Göring nevertheless continued his prominence within the party and was made Prussian Minister of the Interior in Hitler's first cabinet of 1933. When Hitler announced the formation of the Luftwaffe in 1935, Göring was made its commander-in-chief. Göring was a big man with an even bigger ego, and his vanity would certainly contribute to his eventual downfall. None of this was evident, however, during the heady days of the Spanish Civil War and the invasion of Poland, which saw the Luftwaffe sweep all before it. It was only when faced with the determination and skill of the RAF during the Battle of Britain that the first cracks appeared in the Luftwaffe's seemingly invincible facade. Thereafter, the previously close relationship between Hitler and Göring became tense and strained. Confronted by the prospect of diminishing influence over the Führer, Göring began to make a series of unsustainable promises. No bombs, he vowed, would fall on Berlin, and the army at Stalingrad would be supplied from the air by the Luftwaffe. His behavior became increasingly erratic, and he became increasingly dependent on drugs. Gradually, Göring neglected his duties, and the Luftwaffe paid the price. After a telephone call to Hitler in April 1945, during which he indicated his willingness to act as the Führer's successor, Göring was arrested for treason, stripped of all his ranks, and expelled from the party.